Yo, what's up, guys? Today we have a new piece for you. This one is totally different from the others I bring you. Like in this story, we'll follow a protagonist who is considered weak, not just in his own view, but even in his own father's. But aside from that, the guy was extremely strong, considered the strongest man in the world. However, all he had in his hand was a chain. With just a chain in hand, he tries to face dangerous monsters and challenges. But to get there, we need to go back to the beginning. Our story cuts to a cave. The guy sighed, and minutes later, he said he could think a lot about it. Now that he thought it through, he realized he had no chance of defeating a monster like that. Then he wonders if that new reinforcement guild would be arriving. Being surrounded, someone else says they don't know. After all, if things keep going like this, they'll end up dying. But at that moment, a mysterious guy holding a magic book in his hand appears from the background. He asks everyone to stop right there. Everyone then turns around, and as they do, several spikes form in the air, flying toward the monster. This easily defeats it. Those watching are left speechless and can't believe it. At that moment, someone even pulls out their phone to record it. The person who just appeared was one of the hunters, or rather, the best hunter. This was the hunter Ginin. It was the first time they had seen him in person. While they were excited about his presence, our scene cuts to another location. This guy wasn't so happy. After all, he wasn't pleased that his father preferred to stay at home rather than attend his own son's graduation ceremony. One of his colleagues approaches our protagonist and starts asking if, by any chance, his parents wouldn't be coming. He ends up saying they were too busy. But since they were busy, the colleague at least asks him to take a picture. Not wanting to refuse, he simply grabs the phone, and after taking the picture, the scene shifts again. When he gets home, he's greeted by his mother calling him Seunghyun. We notice that his mother had been taking care of his grandmother, who had been in a coma for about 12 years. Putting that aside, our protagonist calls out to her and then asks why she didn't attend his graduation. On the other hand, she apologizes, and then hints that perhaps he already knows the real reason. The real reason was that if she didn't take care of his grandmother's body, something bad could happen, which irritates our protagonist because, in his view, nothing bad would happen anyway. At that moment, someone behind him asks if his grandmother is really that important to him. He replies that the person was being too noisy. When he turns around, he immediately recognizes the figure as his father. Seeing this, he's surprised. After all, his father came home a little earlier, but his father cuts him off, asking if he was raising his voice at his mother. After saying this, he simply ignores him with a serious expression and turns away. But his father stops him, asking where he was going. He says he's going to train. When he mentions training, his father points out that he's done it many times, and in the end, he would never become a hunter. And even if he did, his talent wasn't all that impressive. After all, no one in the world had ever become a hunter using chains. His father tells him to give up. Irritated by this, he leaves and arrives at the training ground. At the training ground, he picks up a sword, but today things felt a bit different. He was training with Leo Jong. Meanwhile, he wondered if today Seunghyun was taking this training a bit more seriously. So he asks Seunghyun to calm down a bit, but nothing he says seems to work, because Seunghyun keeps getting more and more irritated. Knowing this, Leo steps a bit more firmly and then knocks Seunghyun's sword back. But that doesn't stop him. He takes a step back, just enough to activate his chain abilities. Chains in the form of an aura start forming in his hand. The moment he sees those chains, he is surprised because those chains that formed in his hand come in his direction. So, to avoid being caught by these chains, he uses his sword. He then realizes that it's over, but that guy ends up grabbing that chain on his sword, and with a simple movement, he manages to break each piece of the chain. After breaking the chain, he is surprised, but now he couldn't do anything else, especially because his trainer is coming in his direction. The only thing he sees is the fall he takes, and now that he is on the ground, he realizes that this time his ability almost worked. If his chains weren't so weak, he could have won. So, he asks not to use these powers again, which makes him even more irritated. But after this defeat, he ends up going to a restaurant. At the restaurant, he asks not to be mad at him because he is paying for the food. However, he ends up saying that it wasn't about that, because it wasn't cool to eat at the expense of someone who has little money. But interrupting this, he asks our protagonist to rethink a little about trying to use his chains. However, he interrupts because the other competitors have many abilities that are basically useful in a battle. These hunters can shoot fire, and with just one move, break walls. But now, looking at him, he only has a chain ability, and how on earth would he become a hunter? To make things worse, not even his own father recognizes him, and that's why he simply can't stand still watching others get stronger while he falls behind. But after saying this, he mentions a few positive things to our protagonist, things he doesn't take too seriously, especially because our scene shifts to another location. Here, an old man starts talking about some things, saying that it's been 100 years since those monsters appeared. Decades since those monstrous beings started entering their world. Some of them even began to disguise themselves as humans, claiming they returned from another world, deceiving people by saying this was their home when it actually wasn't. But he remembers a word from that friend who once said that home is family, where you should feel at peace. However, for him, it was different, because returning to that place would not be a good idea. And once again, he thought about becoming a hunter, until he looked at his phone. On his phone, he ended up being rejected by yet another university. Being rejected by one more university, he gets so angry that he grabs his phone and throws it on the ground. After that, a few people walking by start looking at our protagonist, who only screams that he will not return to that hell. Then he starts wondering if fate was trying to mess with his life. But after screaming for a while, he stops and begins to hear only the sound of the rain while staring at the ground where his broken phone lies. As he stares at it for a long time, he notices an incoming call. It was from his mother. Knowing this, he picks up the phone, and after answering, he is surprised. He cannot believe it, so he returns home as quickly as possible. Upon arriving home, he is shocked to find his grandmother awake, almost completely well, which surprises the doctors, especially because she had been in a coma for 12 years. But she seemed normal. His mother then points out that now his grandmother is awake. About half an hour later, his mother asks him to stay and help take care of his sister since they would be taking turns. She only criticizes him slightly, but he, on the other hand, mentions that he was not accepted and, moreover, recently graduated. Even though he graduated, it means he doesn't have much free time. But once again, he gets irritated, approaching her and asking who this girl was to tell him he was no longer part of their family. She didn't even, but before he could continue talking, the doctor scolded him slightly. At that moment, she asks him to stop because she doesn't like it. After saying that, we see that his reaction wasn't good, especially because he ended up doing something that, let's say, he didn't like. Time passes, and after this, he starts spending about 3 days a week at the hospital, mainly because his own mother wants him to get closer to his sister. While reading a book, she keeps looking at him. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to another location. At this place, he takes his chains and starts training. As he trains, he remembers those rejections from the academy. Even after all those days, he hasn't stopped for even a day to rest. But ignoring everything he was thinking because training for him wouldn't make any difference, he returns to the room where his sister is in the hospital. However, when he arrives, he is surprised because she is not there. This scares him. He then goes to the window and finds his sister sitting calmly on a bench outside. While sitting there, our protagonist approaches her but unintentionally ends up shouting, which startles her. Still, our protagonist just asks where she had gone. He had been looking for her for a while. She only says that she came outside to get some air. After saying all this, they sit down, and a cold, chilly atmosphere settles around them. But to break this mood, she calls out to Seunghyun and then asks if he hates her, which surprises him and makes him wonder what she was talking about. But right after that, she says that he has become just like their own father. Scary. Especially because in the past, he used to be a little warmer. He then says that was 5 years ago. To make things worse, he doesn't even remember that time. To see something else on the other side of her, she ends up realizing that her parents have aged. Her friends have even changed their numbers. And to make matters worse, She can't even go to school anymore. And to make it even worse, she feels more and more alone in this world. She has no one else. And the moment she says alone, our protagonist looks at her and only then realizes alone this was similar to what he had started experiencing these days. And only after that does he end up saying what nonsense she was talking about. She has her father and mother, and besides, how could she be alone? She could even make new friends again. Besides, making new friends for her was easy. She could go back to school again. But the moment he thinks about it, he ends up remembering that there is something else he could do, because going to the Hunter's Academy is not the only way to become a hunter. Even Yong says he never went to school, and it is also too soon to give up now that he could be thinking about going back. Our protagonist even thinks about getting a wheelchair, but at that moment, he is surprised because a glow starts to appear. From then on, our protagonist is surprised because his sister was suddenly starting to float in the air. Floating in the air, he does not understand what this was. But she starts to say that while she was sleeping, she ended up in the realm of the fairies, and she learned that there. But while talking about it, she remembers that guy who says they are returning from another world to their home. She also remembers her father saying that he cannot become a hunter, not with his abilities. While thinking about this, he simply sees his sister returning. He stayed there alone, and he began to think how weak and pathetic he had become. But while thinking about how weak he was, the scene cuts a little to the past. His mother appears, and the moment she appears, she cannot believe it. The two of them were basically out of the ground, but it was still not enough. They wanted to play more. However, now they could be stopping because it was better to go home to have a meal first, knowing that the next day his sister could be coming back, and they end up leaving. However, for any human, the future is unknown. And it was literally unknown because both ended up following completely different paths. But in the afternoon at their house, they take that first bath, and only after the bath do they stop to have that meal. And after the meal, they end up going to bed because the color of the afternoon was not good. But it was not at that moment that she decided to go to bed and sleep as well, since, after all, the next day she would be playing a lot again. Tomorrow was the next day, but however, she closes her eyes and only then opens them again, but ends up finding a fairy in front of her calling for her. Then the fairy reveals that she was chosen by her own world as well. She invites her to go to another world to save her world, and after that, she spent 6 months in the fairy world. However, when she returned to her original world, 10 years had basically passed. And so, she opens her eyes, and everyone is surprised to see that she finally woke up. And indeed, it was their daughter who had returned. But the bracelet he gave her was meant to seal her awakened ability. However, as we can see, it does not affect someone who has returned like her. But now that she has returned, he asks her what she and they did in that fairy world. She comments that in the fairy world, the fairies taught her how to use magic. But for some reason, in the fairy world, she could not use magic there. And it was also like knowledge, and knowledge was necessary to survive. It was also about how to survive the queen, which surprises him. And he asks himself, Queen, what did that have to do with anything? So, she ended up discovering that this queen was extremely arrogant. So they told her that if by any chance she gave that queen a good scolding, she could return. Her father then implies that she ended up killing the queen, but she immediately says no because she ended up talking to the queen and resolving things in some other ways. However, the sobriety of magic was not dangerous, but it ends up being the opposite, because being a returnee means having a lot of power. And that was dangerous because the powers they awaken are meant to protect the world and save people from the strongest monsters. But in other words, he recognizes her, Seunghyun, as his daughter, as the rank S hunter. Moreover, no matter how secure her sobriety is, her nature also changes with her return. So, considering that her parents keep her under control, preventing her from using her abilities from now on, it would be a good thing, especially because the next day some hunters will be coming here to measure her power. So she just simply thanks him while mentioning that Song, our protagonist's physical abilities, are simply through the roof. However, he is not suitable, but is fighting against Hills, especially because his chain ability was practically a common ability. His chain ability forges chains, but the chains he forges are weaker than the chains they create out there. Based on all of this, they then evaluated his classification. They ended up classifying our protagonist as a Han hunter. Sitting on a bench, he was feeling sad, thinking about what he could be doing. But she calls for our protagonist. She just wanted to show our protagonist the power she had, but nothing had changed yet. Both could basically live the same way, but he simply interrupts her, asking her to leave. He just wants to stay here alone, so he asks her to leave. She, on the other hand, does not understand, but again she asks for an answer. However, our protagonist ends up losing a bit of control and, in the end, ends up shouting at her. Only after doing something crazy like that does he get up, pass by her, and then he goes away in other directions. Meanwhile, our scene cuts to the middle of the city. He was walking around, and while walking, he ends up having a memory of his sister making a completely surprised face, a face he did not want to see. But anyway, what was happening? He had become pathetic. However, out of nowhere, he ends up noticing that something was happening there. A crowd of people was surrounding a certain person, and curious, he thought about looking to see what was going on since there were so many people gathered in one place. As he got a little closer, he realized the reason for so many people being gathered around here. That person was our protagonist's father. Meanwhile, the scene cuts to the hospital. In the hospital, we see our hero's sister, who was sitting while remembering the things that had happened. In her view, our protagonist had completely changed. He used to be a totally nice, happy, and cheerful guy, but now he had become a crazy person. Still, she thinks of a way to change that. To do so, she uses her fairy abilities. By using them, she begins to float, and while floating, she starts flying through the city. After flying for a little while, she ends up landing in that place where she and her brother used to play a lot during their childhood. At this moment, upon arriving at this place, she sees that it is completely different. But she also remembers her childhood there, where she used to play a lot. But now, looking at all this and how much it has changed, she only thinks of one thing. She needed to go back. She just needed to go back a little in time. So she starts thinking that everything could go back to normal. But while she was thinking about this, someone ends up appearing and calling her. Shortly after, they ask her to calm down. They simply came here to resolve a situation, and besides, this place was dangerous. Furthermore, a dungeon rupture had occurred here, and staying around was quite dangerous. Moreover, poor people like her were at risk wandering around here. Some even wondered if it was a good idea to remove her from there. But the moment she was thinking about leaving, we see a guy suddenly grabbing a stick, and right after, he strikes her head hard with it. She does not understand but ends up falling to the ground. On the ground, others ask why he did that, but some end up saying it was not worth helping this kind of person. While they were talking about this, we find her there, totally irritated with everything. She was clutching the ground, but the guys wondered what was happening. She was still alive, but this was strange to them. He struck her head with all his strength, causing severe damage, but she starts wondering why they hit her. Well, this should not matter anymore, especially because she starts wondering why she was doing this. They end up revealing that she should be in a psychiatric hospital and that someone like her wandering around here would not change anything in the world, so they could do whatever they wanted with her. But while they were talking about this, she ends up having a memory of her fairy finding some very interesting books. These spells could give her some very powerful abilities. But at the moment she was thinking about this, she starts forming in the palm of her hand the magic she remembers from the past. After all, this ability they just discovered is a very interesting one because it is practically a magic arrow. However, when this arrow hits her opponent, it does not kill them instantly. On the contrary, it ends up petrifying the person for a few moments. And that is exactly what happens, because the second she launches it, the guy is paralyzed. And as soon as he is paralyzed, she ends up having a memory of her father saying that no matter what her secure ability is, upon returning from the fairy world, people would not care and nothing would change. And again, we see what happened here. He did not just get paralyzed. Instead, it caused significant damage to him. Only after this happened does he simply fall. The girl, on the other hand, who just thought she would paralyze the guy for a few seconds to give her time to escape, is surprised because in the palm of her hand, she realizes the damage she herself caused. While all of this was happening, the scene goes back a little, and we find our protagonist who was there. However, now he has a surprise to see that her father was carrying in his arms that stream that ended up broadcasting her father fighting against those other monsters. She is shocked to realize that he was no longer alive, but at the moment she was there, she accidentally ends up calling out to her father. He notices her presence and turns around to see her. Then, they both stop in a corner with our protagonist. But he starts talking. He begins to wonder if, by any chance, he was not taking care of his sister. He simply says that he wanted to go out to get some fresh air. Ignoring that, he asks if it is the first time he has seen someone like that, completely out. He says yes to that. Then he mentions that from 4 to 10, that was the mortality rate last year in the hunter industry. 2 out of 10 suffer serious injuries, and 1 out of 10 ends up quitting the hunter career. Then once again, he comments that this kind of world is a world where you need to be confident and strong enough to trust that you will survive, and most die. He ends up saying that he was confused, and for that he approaches and asks him to think a little before leaving. Later, he ends up thinking that it has always been like this. His abilities were a bit deficient, but on TV, he always saw hunters fighting against powerful monsters, which was an inspiration to him. He knows he cannot become a hunter. What should he do until, out of nowhere, he looks up and finds a girl floating? While he was thinking that he should still become a hunter, he realizes that this person floating was his sister. He tries to get closer and closer, but as he approaches, he senses that something is not right. At that moment, he notices blood on her clothes and wonders if he is right. However, she, who was completely lost and out of control, simply asks him not to come closer. He does not understand, but suddenly, she starts trembling and a bit more seriously asks again for him not to approach. But once again, that energy of hers grows stronger, covering our protagonist completely. The hospital area, which had a calm glow, transformed into a gigantic pink light. From afar, one of the guards nearby saw the whole scene and ended up shouting for others to call more hunters because a huge threat had appeared. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, there was someone causing a disturbance there. At this moment, our protagonist stands up and begins to wonder what was happening. On the other hand, she says she doesn't know and doesn't want to know anything else, but she also asks our protagonist to leave. Meanwhile, several cutting lightning bolts destroy the forest and the ground around them. Furthermore, she asks him to leave that place because she did not want to kill him. But at that moment, that power of hers controlled her more and more. While he was wondering what he could do, he overheard that the people had called some guards, meaning that the guards would have the right to shoot at that thing. When he hears that, there is nothing he can do. At that moment, he starts thinking about what he should do because the police were faster than his own father, so he thought that someone there should be even faster. He then stops, and only after that does he realize he could do something. He looks at the palm of his hand and sees the damage. At first, he even thought about fighting against his sister. However, he realizes that he will not be able to defeat her. So he only thinks about running away because this was not his fault. But again, as he thought about running away, a faint memory of himself from the past came to mind. A boy sitting on the ground. But when he sees himself from the past, he begins to think about the things he did because she ends up shouting that she hates everyone. In return, she did not want to hurt anyone else. But in the middle of her crazy thoughts, she hears someone calling her name, and as soon as she hears her name, she simply opens her eyes. The moment she opens her eyes, she is surprised to find our protagonist extending his hand toward her and calling her name. He asks if she needs his help, and at the same time, wonders if she can hear him. If so, it would be better to compose herself a little. At the moment she sees Ruin coming toward her, she has a memory of our protagonist from before, but she knows that the one who practically did this to her was our protagonist, leaving her in this state. So he must be risking his life to save others. That is what a hunter does. Knowing this, he asks her to calm down because abilities tend to go out of control when the person is confused. So, what needed to be done was simply to stay calm. Things would be fine. This leaves her confused as to why he was going so far for her. Looking at the palm of her hand, she realizes that she is no longer the same as before. But then, that fairy from the other dimension appears and asks what happened to her. She was their heroine and had saved their world. But the moment she says that she saved their world, she also says that while doing so, she lost everything. She no longer has friends. And to make things worse, she accidentally killed someone. However, on the other hand, the fairy says that this was not true because when someone does this and there is no one, she had never even seen someone like her, without friends or anything, having someone by her side at least to be risking everything. Hearing this, she decides to open her eyes, and only afterward does she think that to save the people they hate, it was necessary to go back. And at that moment, our protagonist ends up extending those chains of his toward the palm of his hand, and only after extending them does he manage to save her. But at the moment he saved her, and that whole event disappeared. The police appeared. While she was in his arms, she suddenly starts crying, and immediately after, she faints. But after everything that just happened, our protagonist simply starts staring ahead, where he finds himself only seeing his childhood self, and only at the end does he end up understanding a true meaning there. But out of nowhere, an unknown person appears from behind, which completely surprises him, and he also begins to wonder if, by any chance, that girl also saw that kid back there. She says no. The next day, that incident ended up spreading to a few places, mainly because it was quickly resolved by the police. The disturbance was not even reported in the newspapers. But it is an even smaller story than this that, at the moment he was thinking about what he was going to do with his life, a guard appears saying that it was visiting time. And as soon as he mentions this, the scene cuts to them walking around with several guards by their side. While walking, she starts thinking that the day before, her mother cried a lot upon discovering everything, knowing that she might encounter a very sad scene on the other side of that door. She wonders what she should do, but the moment she opens the door, she is surprised because the one who was there was her own father. At that moment, she freezes but ends up sitting down, and only after does she open her mouth to break the whole atmosphere. But on the other hand, he ends up stating that he was there only today to get her out of jail. While they were talking, he asks her to remember that girl who came along with the mother of our protagonist's sister. That girl has a special ability. This ability is to extend memory, and she read her memory and realized that in that whole incident that happened, she was innocent. After all, at the beginning, she ended up kind of receiving a hard blow to the head, and after the first attack, she used all her strength to protect herself. By law, it was an extremely justified reaction, so this process could not continue any further, which makes her completely happy. But not understanding the justification, in a slightly lower tone, she tries to process it a little, especially because the night before, she accidentally sent a guy flying, and to her, that was considered a crime. But the guy immediately says that no one died that night, which surprises her even more. That uncertain shot she fired did not end up killing that guy, because in this world there are other people who possess extremely high healing abilities, and it is very likely that this guy managed to heal those severe injuries. So now, in the end, it was considered that she did not kill anyone that other day, which makes her quite relieved at this moment. But relieved as she is now, we then observe that girl from before, who wonders if by any chance he finished speaking. He ends up confirming that he did, but on the other hand, since it is a relief, they end up commenting that he will not be able to cover all the damage that happened at the hospital. But because he cannot, he will have to pay some fines. But in the end, it was a relief, and they also cannot spread this to other people or other hunters about what just happened. Anyway, sooner or later some people will find out. But at the moment, she wonders who was the person who decided to attack her daughter. After all, that guy she unfortunately attacked did die. She, at the moment, cannot know the truth. Her mind is extremely fragile, and if anything leaks to her, it is very likely that she will be extremely distressed and could return to that previous state again. But now she has a document that he picks up, which leaves him surprised. But she simply asks him to take it since that document belonged to her daughter. And the moment he takes that document, he has an extremely irritated expression, and only after does he ask what it was. They also ask who saw it, and at the moment they were asking that, our scene shifts to another place, and we find our trainer who was eating some chips while watching him trying to use those chains of his to hit some cans in front of him. But his chain abilities, while good, were not achieving what he wanted so much, which ends up making him frown. At first, he even thinks that the snacks he was eating were disturbing him a lot. He even asks his other teammate if by any chance he got rid of those things because he points in his direction. And only afterward does he reveal that these snacks he was eating were indeed disturbing him a lot. After revealing this, he asks if by any chance he was missing the cans because of it. He answers yes, but on the other hand, he ends up giving another answer. If by any chance, in hand-to-hand combat, some noises happen behind him, what will happen to him then? Such variables are very likely to occur inside a dungeon. If he gets too distracted by it, it would be better not even to bother trying to enter. He needs to train a bit more. And for that, he approaches Jus and asks if by any chance he knows him. He ends up wondering if he was trying to pick a fight directly with our protagonist. Besides, he trained a lot, and with that, he could have significant results. But he asks to stop that conversation and continue the training. What he really said is true. He knows his physical abilities and his sense, but his proficiency is terrible. However, he ends up disappearing and reappearing behind him, which surprises him greatly. Behind him, he ends up commenting that those chains he creates with his ability are why he does not achieve any results. After all, it consumes a lot of energy to manipulate them. However, if by any chance he uses a lot of force in each of his actions, he will have significant results. But professionals do not use much power. Maybe he wonders if he can do that. For that, he sticks his hand into the bag of chips, and only afterward takes out a few with a bit of energy that he puts into them. In those little potatoes, he manages to launch that thing in the direction of those cans, and one of them ends up being caught. Not just caught, but also pierced through, which leaves our protagonist completely surprised, as he had never seen anything like that before. After finishing, he wonders if he can do something similar. Even after looking at it for a long time, he realizes that his ability was incredible. The snacks were still on the table, but before he could leave, he was asked to pay attention to one more thing. He mentions that he doesn't know his true power, but after saying that, he pulls out the scroll. He comments that this was a tool for summoning returnees. Then he asks him to try approaching it with his chains. He does so, but the moment he approaches with his chains, that scroll disappears. Only afterward does he say that he succeeded. After saying that he succeeded, he asks him to remember something, like that accident at the hospital. Right at that moment when his sister had that total power, she was about to destroy everything. There was nothing that could absorb her power, but when he used his chains on her, all the power his sister had completely vanished. In short, he ends up saying that he has the precedent powers, an incredible power. This power is the power to seal the power of the returnees, since these chains practically have the most incredible power in the world. Simply swinging them aimlessly and exerting total effort without confidence in what you have wouldn't allow you to reach much potential, but the chains have a lot of potential. He needed to understand his own potential as well, and only by understanding the real meaning he was placing would he be able to achieve his true power. But today, he came all the way here to recruit our protagonist. However, once again, he asks him not to do it, especially because he had ended up being rejected by yet another academy. But he tells him not to worry about that, since he has much greater authority that can recommend students for admissions. After all, to him, his chain abilities were very good, so because of that, He confirms that he has just passed. But there's another thing. He would need to accept joining him. His answer was on the tip of his tongue. After thinking for a bit, he ends up agreeing and wanting to join him. And so, he ends up saying that he finally became a guy who was part of the Hunter Academies. Now he welcomes him to the Hunter Academy. He hands the paper to our hero, but the moment he does that, another admission comes flying in his direction. He quickly notices it. So he uses our protagonist's admission to protect himself, grabbing that unknown admission that came toward him. But the moment he held it, we then find the father of our protagonist from another place, who was emanating an extremely high aura. At this moment, he tries to explain everything to him, or at least asks for time to try to explain something, but he completely ignores our hero's presence. Then, he turns to our protagonist's teacher and asks what he was trying to plot here today, something he really should be asking. The father of our protagonist again asks what kind of dirty trick he was trying to use against him, but he doesn't even care about what he says. He comments that he was gaining a lot of scars. Moreover, he could even forget about him if he didn't come to visit his friends. But while trying to change the subject, he brings up the previous matter again and asks him to comment on it. But while he kept talking about it, we then see our protagonist surprised to see that the two of them know each other. However, the teacher of our protagonist, on the other hand, ends up saying that he only sent a few recommendation letters. After all, to him, Jin Seunghyun, our protagonist, has a rather interesting ability comparable to an S rank. And now Jin Seunghyun, our protagonist, has an unprecedented ability. But he refuses because his son is an elementary school student, and he can't even adjust to an academy like this. The adjustment part surprises him because it was a good point to touch on, especially because he started hearing some rumors that his daughter was beginning to lose control. At that moment, she was a ticking time bomb. She needed to learn properly in a specialized school. For that, he was more than enough to train her. But now, thinking about it, we realize he was being stubborn again. However, now he looks at our protagonist and realizes that this guy has no talent. If he accepts him, it's very likely that he will have only one destiny, and that destiny is death. But the moment he talks about this, he says he was wrong. He ends up commenting that earlier he threw himself to save his sister. He has the bravery and the need to become a hunter. To him, that wasn't bravery, but rather recklessness. Then he turns to our hero and begins to ask him a question. Does he, by any chance, know exactly what his ability is? From his sister, if by any chance he was sure how he could be subjugating that she would not survive, which his own father ends up confirming that he was not focusing on the results. He simply had the ability to stop her by chance, and everything worked out at the moment. Then he wonders if he will continue relying on his luck while fighting. This strategy is perfect for ending up dead at the end of the story. But his teacher ends up stating that his father was just stalling. Getting a special recommendation means that he will not be treated in a special way. Even if he goes to that academy, he will be left behind and crushed by the competition there, since that school really only has students with very strong powers. But anyway, if something happens, it will be helping our protagonist. But again, he ends up kind of interrupting the conversation, saying that the protagonist was vague, but in the end, he ends up trying to say that the protagonist did a good thing. He could simply thank him for the good work since he just saved his sister. But on the other hand, he starts to get more and more irritated because no one believes in him, irritated to the point that he could be attacking him. But he is interrupted by another guy there who ends up congratulating our protagonist, drawing the attention of everyone around. Moreover, a teacher just recognized him, and now he is getting closer and closer to his dream. But he tried to say something else to keep dragging him down more and more, but he asks not to think about things like that since he himself should be choosing and moving forward. Because if he does not move forward and does not trust his own path, who will he be in the future? Regardless of which path he chooses, even those he has walked all this time ended up causing results. Besides, he does not need someone powerful to recognize him. Furthermore, people like that one do not know the true power someone has to awaken. But now, looking ahead, He understands the real reason he is so obsessed with becoming a hunter. He ends up wondering if it was he who gave false hope that he could become a hunter. So, irritated by this, he ends up punching our protagonist's friend. But at the moment it was about to hit him, our hero simply slaps his face, which ends up making him wake up to reality a bit. Upon waking up, our protagonist's father understands nothing, but he ends up thanking his friend because he managed to come back to himself. And at the beginning of it all, back in childhood, he wanted to be just like his father. A powerful guy, powerful to the point where his own father would recognize his strength. He used to think about pathetic things like that. But that day at the hospital was different. At that moment, he saw how pathetic he wanted to become, and now he was ready. Now he was ready to become a hunter. And to manage to become a great and strong hunter, he will need to surpass some people, and that person is his own father. He gets irritated upon hearing this, then extends his hand towards him. He understands that these words did not reach his head, but instead of attacking the kid, he simply places his hand on his shoulder and ends up saying that he should go there since he does not want to listen. He asks him to go there. Once he gets there, he will truly recognize the real danger. There, he will have two conditions. One of them is to join the student council, and if he cannot enter the student council within a year, it means that he was not good enough to become a hunter. So he should return home as quickly as possible. He ends up not believing it. But secondly, he asks him to protect his sister since her powers are basically unstable, and his power might help recover her consciousness a bit. Furthermore, he is the one who wants to send her along with our protagonist. So he makes sure to protect her at school. But at that school, if he fails a single test, he will be looking for him. Upon hearing this, he ends up agreeing, and only then does he remove his hand from his shoulder. Only after that does he turn his back and walk away. They then simply keep staring at each other while our protagonist's friend just says that guy almost killed him with the pressure alone. But the scene cuts to them walking through the city. While walking through the city, we find our protagonist's teacher. He asks him to stop because he went too far by sending him to join the student council. The members there are all first-class honor students. There is no way a rank F guy like him could do that. Besides, he was just a first-year student, but our protagonist's father says that he created an entire hunter honor in front of him, so he should be able to do it. Something that the teacher, on the other hand, ends up saying no to. But he calls for Jin Wong, and then he says that he never wanted to drag anyone into this path, but he remembers that at the beginning, he wanted to be just like his own father. Then he turns around, which leaves the teacher completely surprised. Then he ends up turning around and following another path, understanding the real weight of the words he just said. Meanwhile, our scene cuts to our hero's sister's room, who ends up receiving approval that she can now enter the Hunter Academies. And so, February, a month full of expectations, came to an end. While all of this was ending, our scene cuts to our hero in another place, extending his hand while trying to concentrate his chains. But time passed, and March arrived, bringing all the changes as well. This change was a gigantic ship where they would be entering the academy. Hunters. But while he was thinking about entering, our scene cuts to another place in the childhood of an unknown boy. He ends up wondering if he would really do that, because there were still innocent people here. He was a hunter, and hunters shouldn't act like that. Sad about this, he ends up shouting, but he woke up after that nightmare with his eyes open and sweating a lot. After a while, he kind of gets up, but at that moment his friend appears beside him and asks if he was okay, because a little while ago he was moaning a bit. But he ends up saying that it was just a bad sleeping habit. Since he was basically the new student, he introduces himself as a second-year student and asks that they get along. The guy extends his hand and introduces himself with his so ambi. After he introduces himself, the scene cuts to outside the place, still on the ship. We find our protagonist checking the medical kits, but among those medical kits, there are some knives, which surprises her. Our protagonist, flustered, ends up saying that she accidentally borrowed them from her father, but after saying that, she gets a little startled. Out of nowhere, she stands up and starts staring at something outside the ship. Curious, she thinks about leaving. Our protagonist asks her to wait because she would get lost alone out there, but she insists that she hasn't forgotten the room number. However, if something happens to her, she will call our protagonist. Now that she left, our protagonist even thinks he was dealing with a child. When she leaves, he turns to the window where he sees some birds, and only then does he calmly realize that things had become much more important to him. While thinking about important things, another person was also thinking. After all, now a new cycle was beginning. He would be studying at another school without any friends, but in this new school, he needed to build relationships with some powerful classmates because having useful connections would yield good results. With a slightly serious face, he ends up thinking like this. Meanwhile, others start looking at him and try to figure out what he was trying to say. He comments that next time, he needed to get closer to some new students, but also to some pretty girls, which he ends up understanding. However, while murmuring things behind their backs, they start talking about other things. Suddenly, they turn in another direction and notice the presence of a girl. Now that he found her, he realizes that he had finally found what he wanted so much. But the girl who was handing out food rations simply lets it fall. Before it can hit the ground, he appears as fast as possible and catches the package, handing it back to her. Now, facing the girl directly, he realizes that she was too beautiful. So he ends up asking for a moment and then comments that these snacks wouldn't go to waste. This somehow managed to attract the attention of something more important to him. After he says that, she just stands there without understanding anything. Out of nowhere, he starts asking which room she was in. But the scene goes back to the others, where we see them wondering where that other guy was. One even says that maybe he is looking for some new students. In the end, they find him hitting on a girl. But now that he looks at this guy, he realizes that this guy is quite good and very strong, too. For some reason, he ends up revealing that he failed some exams. But even failing some exams, they should be paying some tuition fees, of course, if they wanted to re-enroll. Now, looking at everyone, they realize that everyone here must have money, and for that, he needed to become a hunter as quickly as possible because there are dangerous people in the world. To be honest, he didn't really know what qualifications were needed to become a hunter, but while pondering this sincere question, he sees his other friend who suddenly followed a girl into a dark alley. Knowing that it wasn't good to leave him alone, he decided to follow as well. The scene then cuts to room 105, where we find our protagonist casually reading something, but out of nowhere he is interrupted by her, all confused. Now she points behind her and says that the strange guy back there was trying to harass her. Upon hearing this, we see him completely losing his composure. He almost falls to the ground. She continues to say that the guy even asked if she had a boyfriend and then suddenly started touching her. Hearing this, his face grows more serious. Outside, we find those guys from before, but suddenly room 405 opens and a guy flies out of there. The one who flew out asks them to wait a bit and even asks to stop because he wanted to talk. On the other hand, our protagonist says that he was already talking with his fists, being the best way to communicate. But before things could get worse, another person appears and ends up stopping everything. After all that commotion, our protagonist begins to explain the story that she had been unconscious for 12 years, so he ends up thinking that she was still a child. He apologizes on behalf of his friend for doing something stupid like that. But on the other hand, our protagonist apologizes for not hitting him a little more. Out of nowhere, he introduces this guy to our protagonist, who is the same age as him. Now, they could move forward from here. Friends start getting along better and better, and they eventually come to an understanding and leave the room. While walking around, our nerd begins to ask the protagonist which hunter department he is in. After asking that, he then asks the protagonist which hunter he likes the most. Our protagonist replies that he doesn't like any hunter, but he ends up telling the nerd that his father is quite influential. Curious, the nerd asks him what his father's name is. He ends up saying that his father's name is Hunter's Chimba Hacker. At the moment he says that name, he has a flashback of that hunter from the past. However, our protagonist, on the other hand, ends up saying that he was his, and as soon as he says that, the guy who was flirting with the protagonist's sister turns around, more than shocked. Meanwhile, his new friends comment that they are big fans of him. And another one says the same thing. But Shim Baek, this guy did something in the past that he didn't like. Lying on the ground, he remembers seeing him floating in the air while casting a powerful spell toward him. Now, completely pale, he starts staring at our protagonist. In the end, we realize that he is the son of the guy who nearly destroyed everything for him. They keep saying that his father was a role model for them and that they dreamed of becoming a hunter like him when they were young. But something happened that confuses our protagonist. Then they ask why he is in the hunter department. Initially, he tried to become a hunter, but ended up in the magical engineering department instead. Since he was just a Hanier, he didn't really stand a chance to become an outstanding hunter. But, well, our protagonist couldn't say much either because he himself was rank F. He even tried to speak up, but he was too embarrassed. However, his sister wasn't. She ends up revealing that he had just joined the hunter department as a rank F hunter. The moment she reveals his level, everyone is surprised. But before things could calm down, she starts talking again. Our protagonist just asks her to stay quiet for a few minutes, shaking her head from side to side. After that, he asks her not to tell everyone that both of them got a recommendation to become hunters. Now that they know, he turns to that guy and says that even if someone is a rank F hunter, they can still become a strong hunter in the future. After all, if you are persistent, you can achieve anything you want. The guy then looks at him and simply thanks him. However, the white-haired one doesn't seem to like things so much. He just starts thinking about what he should do with our protagonist. While thinking about that, we then see Yacht, chilling under the midday sun while the nerd starts talking about some interesting games with our hero's sister. Meanwhile, that other guy keeps flirting with other female students around. On the other hand, our protagonist is wandering around, bored. While he's feeling bored, he ends up meeting that friend from before. He approaches him and asks if, by any chance, he is feeling bored too. At that moment, the seagull comes closer. After a while, he starts asking our hero questions, one of which is why he is trying to become a hunter. He tries to bring up May's father's name, but our protagonist asks him to stop, as he is trying to explain his beliefs and why he wants to become a hero. However, he reveals that he doesn't know, as he never really thought about it. At that moment, the white-haired guy becomes even paler. He is visibly irritated by everything. The young man expresses uncertainty, saying, "I'm not sure." He seems confused and divided, possibly about an important decision. The white-haired man comments that he had never thought about anything. The speech suggests reflection. He concludes that many become hunters frivolously after watching the news. This indicates an opinion about the lack of seriousness of some hunters. He states that some hunters are only looking for easy money and fame. The speech conveys a negative judgment about the motivations of certain individuals. The young man confirms that there are hunters with these characteristics, mentioning, "Well, there are hunters like that." He seems to agree with the previous observation. The white-haired man continues, explaining that, in addition to the benefits, there are significant responsibilities. The speech emphasizes the negative aspects of the hunting profession. He declares his hatred for hunters, showing his negative feelings. The comment is blunt and straightforward. The protagonist asks why he became a hunter, given his aversion. The question seeks to understand the contradiction between his feelings and his actions. The white-haired man reveals his aspiration to be a hunter who wants to save everyone. The speech exposes his motivation and ideal as a hunter. The blue-haired boy just mutters, showing hesitation or thought after hearing the other's statement. The boy advises the protagonist not to go to the academy, as that is his point of view. He is surprised, possibly a sudden appearance of feathers. He comments that someone can achieve something with hard work, even if they are of low rank. Then he adds that the awakening of abilities is pure luck. He states that the rank, once decided, never changes. He says that entering the academy requires a high monthly fee and a good family background. A man says that someone like the other boy needs to have a rich father. He complains that the way the other talks is unpleasant. Then he explains that he got there because he awakened his abilities late. He says that awakening abilities has nothing to do with hard work. He argues that gaining an ability suddenly means that one had no idea that one had an ability before. That gaining an ability suddenly means that one had no idea that one already had one. The protagonist comments that by luck, he has awakened a power. We see the energy fight in the background. Whitehair says that the boy got a recommendation to enter that place because he has a special ability. He claims that they are there as students in the hunter department, that it is all due to his luck. The guy with white hair says that the boy wants to be a hunter without recognizing something obvious, that everything will work out if he tries hard. The guy with white hair criticizes the protagonist for giving up on his dream after getting an E rating. He accuses him of bluffing about achieving everything with effort. He encourages the protagonist by saying that, even with an E rating, he can be a hunter with effort. The protagonist says that he has the same mental age as his sister. The protagonist says, "You bastard," while looking like he is going to attack him. The guy with white hair takes the hit, but the protagonist falls to the ground. His sister is scared, holding something. She asks what's going on. The white-haired guy says that the protagonist fell and is fine. The girl says that her brother is clumsy. The brother is on the ground, hurt. The protagonist wonders what just happened. He says that something appeared before the white guy's punch hit him. The white-haired guy says that his trajectory has changed. He says that those who start fighting first ruin the hunting industry. He says that people like the protagonist hurt the hunting industry. The white-haired guy says that it would be wise for him to listen to him and give up being a hunter. The white-haired guy questions something, looking confused. He seems to be stuck to something. He falls to the ground, kneeling. The white-haired guy on the ground says something about being stuck. The protagonist says that he got there by pure luck and doesn't feel qualified to be a hunter. Another guy agrees that he got there by luck, but questions him about his desire to be a hunter. The protagonist says that being there, he deserves a chance to become a hunter, that he won't leave the academy willingly. The white-haired guy comments that even if he stays with his rank, it will be difficult to survive. The protagonist says, "We'll see then." Another guy tells him to go there at midnight, telling them to go with everything. A large ship approaches, facing a strong storm at sea. A female eye with a tear running down it, with the phrase, "It's okay." A girl with an ethereal appearance says that something will never disappear. The girl lying in bed, sleepy, says that something will surely happen at some point. Crying near the window in the rain, the girl wonders if something was a dream. She also mentions a name, Seunghyun. Sitting on her bed, she looks away. Walking around the dorm, worried, she asks where Seunghyun went. She screams in fright as someone calls out to him. The boy asks what the others are doing after commenting on the noise. The girl asks what everyone is doing. The group of kids says they are planning to go play in another room, and one of them spots a new student. One of the boys invites the girl to join them. She discusses taking Sohyun to school. Someone asks if it's okay, and another replies that it would be good to meet the kids first. She excitedly says she wants to go. She is excited about the invitation. The group arrives at a location and someone says, "We're here." 3 people comment on the funny expression of someone who is not present. A smiling girl tells them to sit down. One of the boys shows surprise. He tells them he is leaving and the girl responds with surprise and complains about not having been warned of the girl's presence. The girl notices a lot of snacks in the place. She asks if she can eat something. Another says yes. The one with glasses, being stared at by him, tells him not to look at him because he brought the girl. The girl asks Woo Jin to sit down. Woo Jin says he is sitting down. She asks who Woo Jin's new close friend is. He replies that he has gotten closer to a new friend. The girl says hi. The girls greet each other. The one with glasses asks where Seunghyun went. The girl says she doesn't know. He had already left when she woke up. He thinks he noticed Subin missing from the room. He remembers something strange that happened before. He wonders if there is something between those 2 people. The protagonist, under an umbrella in the rain, exclaims in surprise, "What?" The other boy, also in the rain, comments on Whitehair's clothes. That outfit. Whitehair completes the observation. A coat protagonist asks, "Who doesn't know that?" The protagonist questions the first one's attitude. "Is that how you come to fight?" White hair responds, justifying the use of the umbrella. "It's raining, idiot." The second guy criticizes, "Why are you using an umbrella? You won't be able to fight like that." The first one retorts, "I'm using it so I don't get too wet." Both look at each other under the rain. One thinks, "Is this guy an idiot?" The other, "Is this guy an idiot?" The second boy sighs in relief. "Phew!" And his energy begins to emerge. The protagonist reacts with cries of effort and also releases his energy. White hair explains his ability. The ability is the spirit of water. "It's raining here and this area is surrounded by the sea." The boy comments that, in that place, the power of the spirit of water is the strongest, that not even he can control his strength, and that the protagonist could die. He asks if he is the one who started all of this. White hair says that there is no way to avoid what is happening, and his magic object flies around him. The protagonist seems perplexed. He has his star-shaped weapon. A jet of water is thrown with force at the protagonist. The powerful blow flies in a burst towards him, but with great effort he dodges it. The protagonist immediately begins to move his chains. He soon counterattacks the white-haired one with his chains. He says that it is incredible. He states that although it looks like a chain, it is actually weak. White hair comments that the chain is weaker than a real chain. Protagonist is surprised to realize that his opponent has more than one spirit. White hair says that nothing can be done with that chain. That, whether attacking or defending, he can use the chain. The protagonist shows surprise. Soon the extra fires more blasts of water at the protagonist, who dodges them as best he can. Protagonist holds the blue energy chain with an angry expression. White hair questions if that is all his opponent has. He asks if that is the only tactic used by the opponent. He asks the protagonist if he realized that he did not move. The second responds that he did not move a step. He asks if the other understood. Then he states that he does not belong there. Protagonist asks the other if he hasn't moved a single step until that moment. He explains that this is why the other didn't notice something. He looks at the ground and shouts, "What, Zrania?" while he is surrounded by chains. Protagonist calls him a bastard, while the other seems to attack him. He pulls the chain hard. He starts pulling the chain, spinning the boy who is tied by the leg. While he is being spun, the white hair asks the protagonist why he used the same tactic. Protagonist answers that it is because he only knows how to do it that way. But before I go, leave a comment below saying what you thought about this new manhwa. Did you like the new angle of our protagonist, who uses chains instead of powers? And before I head out, leave a like below, and if possible, subscribe to the channel. For now, I'm signing off. Maybe I'll see you around, or maybe just in the next part.